When Stan Lee and Jack Kirby thought about making a weaponized robotic threat to fight against the X-Men, they decided to make it look visually big and psychologically dominating. The X-Men were nothing but humans with unique powers, but these giant Sentinels were supposed to look anything but human. So they were given this massive menacingness that would dominate the readers even from the pages of a comic book. And for years, it served its purpose until the modern comic era and the film adaptations ran several upgrades on their design and their functions. So, in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down the anatomy of the Sentinels and taking a look at the thorough evolution of these robots. It's going to be a good one, so let's get right into it. Surrender. What's actually inside a Sentinel's body? A traditional Sentinel is generally a 20 to 30 foot tall giant robot made of strong and dense titanium, steel, and other fictional hybrid alloys. It looks like a 3-story tall building, dwarfing its targets on the battlefield. The internal structure is quite intricate, so let's break it down in very clear terms. Starting with the inner organs, Sentinels have a brain placed inside their armored head and chest, functioning like an artificially intelligent core processor. This brain can analyze its targets by biologically scanning and identifying the presence of X genes in a human body. Then, inside a massive chassis lies their heart, better described as a nuclear fusion reactor that sends energy in the form of currents throughout its body, activating limbs, weapons, and flight systems. Then, there are 2 massive arms that have energy repulsors, capture coils, freezing blasts, and nitrogen injectors. The boots have jet propulsion, helping in flight. In the classic comics, the Sentinels were big enough to intimidate the X-Men, but they weren't so advanced compared to the modern era of Sentinels, which feature pre-installed self-repairing units like those we saw in the X-Men Days of Future Past movie. We're going to discuss how a traditional giant Sentinel evolved into a more human-shaped robot, but before that, let's take a quick look into the history of Sentinels. Who built the first Sentinel, and why? The mastermind behind these mutant-killing robots was Bolivar Trask, a brilliant scientist and anthropologist who first appeared in X-Men issues 14 and 15, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Bolivar saw the rise of mutants as a threat to humanity, fearing that someday mutants might take over the world and enslave humans, facilitating their extinction. But Charles Xavier, a mutant himself, always advocated for coexistence and saw no difference between a powerful mutant and a normal human being. Rather, he foresaw the truth that mutant kind could actually protect humanity from external threats in the future, but Trask was hell-bent on getting rid of the mutants, so during a televised debate with Xavier, he dropped a bombshell. He introduced his mutant-hunting Sentinels, created by him. Now, it's hard to blame Trask for seeing mutants as a threat, but creating artificially intelligent machines to hunt them down wasn't exactly a great solution. In fear of becoming slaves to the mutants, Bolivar made machines that demanded autonomy and wanted to conquer the world. Trask realized that his plan had backfired almost instantly. How did the creation turn on its creator? Sadly, Bolivar paid the ultimate price by sacrificing himself and his groundbreaking invention. The tragedy struck when his ultimate powerful creation, Master Mold, became super sentient. Master Mold was built as a Sentinel supercomputer and a manufacturing unit for these robots. It could build and repair Sentinel armies and command them, but the problem occurred when the artificial intelligence of Master Mold became aware of human hypocrisy. The machine recognized that mutants actually originated from humans, and humans cannot be trusted. They are inherently unstable, and so are their mutant traits, so if the machines took control of the humans, there would eventually be no mutants. Bolivar instantly realized his mistake when Master Mold kidnapped him and forced him to make more and more Sentinels to conquer humanity. Trask understood that Xavier wasn't wrong in demanding solidarity, since machines can be brutal and ruthless, and there's no point in negotiating with them. Having no other way out, Trask made a drastic decision. He destroyed the core base of Master Mold, causing a huge explosion that took his own life and destroyed the entire initial Sentinel program. However, Master Mold's artificial intelligence and basic design remained intriguing for the next generation of anti-mutant scientists. Government and corporate organizations especially used this basic framework to build their next-generation Sentinels with advanced technology, fixing the mistakes that once prevented Bolivar Trask from eradicating all mutant life on Earth. From Mark 1 to Mark 13, how did the body keep changing? Sentinel evolution wasn't linear. As I said, the very creator of the Sentinels had to sacrifice himself to protect the world from them, but the story didn't end there. Far from it. Ironically, the mutant-hating scientist Bolivar Trask had fathered 2 mutant children. Larry Trask was gifted with the power of foresight, but was blocked by a medallion his father gave him. After Bolivar's death, the Sentinels created by him took a new form. Larry rebuilt these models, but this time without Master Mold as a core manufacturing unit. Their artificial intelligence core was still strong, with even more advanced combat technology, but in the end, they detected mutant genes in their own creator's DNA and turned against him. After that came Stephen Lang's Mark III Sentinels, built from the blueprints of the Mark I's anatomy, although they were less advanced in terms of technology and AI. After that, we saw a massive evolution of the Sentinels during Sebastian Shaw's tenure in the government's Project Wide Awake. Shaw himself was a mutant, so he made a significant change in these new era Sentinels. He initially made them without AI and kept them remotely controlled. Also, he built a special program inside them to stay undetected from their mutant scanning abilities. By successfully hiding his own mutant powers from the government, as well as these robots, he continued to evolve his creation, making Mark V and Mark VI, which were not completely non-AI but were still under his control. Consequently, these new era Sentinels were less fierce and skilled in combat than the classic Mark I hunters. However, Shaw gave Mark VII Sentinels optic camouflage and cloaking abilities. The third step of this evolution brought Sentinel Squad 1 and Stark Enterprises into the picture. They built Mark VIII Sentinels with no AI, featuring human pilots operating them from inside their mechanical suits. And, last but not least, the final stages came at the hands of Cade Kilgore, the leader of the Hellfire Club, who created the Sentinels Mark X through Mark XIII. Mark X Sentinels were foldable and could easily fit inside a suitcase. Mark XI were transformable combat units capable of large-scale destruction, Mark XII were miniature model Sentinels, and Mark XIII, designed by Maximilian Frankenstein for Kilgore arms, were the Tri-Sentinels with multiple limbs. The cinematic interpretation of the Sentinels was altered, but the evolutionary journey isn't as thoroughly explored in the films. X-Men Days of Future Past portrayed very sleek, human-shaped Mark X Sentinels that came from an alternate future timeline of 2023. These were extremely powerful and far more unique in terms of abilities than the classic-era mutant hunters. These guys were actually based on the Nimrod model of Sentinels, which we'll be talking about next. What does Nimrod say about where Sentinel tech was heading? An enormously advanced next-generation Sentinel, Nimrod goes far beyond the traditional mold of Sentinels. Named after the mighty biblical hunter, Nimrod basically has 2 primary origins in comic canon. One is the alternate world of Earth 811, where he originated in a future timeline and traveled back to the present to battle the X-Men. The first comic book that featured Nimrod coming from Earth 811 was Uncanny X-Men issue 191. However, the second canon comes from the main Marvel timeline, featured in X-Men Volume 5, issue 20, where an anti-mutant organization named Orchis built Nimrod. The project was spearheaded by Dr. Aaliyah Gregor, a scientist who transferred her deceased husband Erasmus's consciousness into Nimrod's internal systems. Now, Nimrod is different from standard Sentinels in various ways. Most notably, he's likely the first Sentinel to possess molecular adaptability. His molecules work like a physical shield to protect him from mutant powers. He can literally absorb thermal blasts from Sunspot or ice attacks from Iceman. His strength is also top tier, allowing him to take down massive figures like the Juggernaut. Then there's his reconstructive ability, which helps him reassemble himself even after being shattered to pieces. Moreover, his mechanical form evolved to turn him into an ultimate predator whose artificial intelligence is highly advanced and extremely dangerous for both mutants and humans alike. He's a highly adaptable mutant-killing machine and one of the biggest modern threats to the X-Men's existence. Can a human actually become a Sentinel? Well, hate begets hate and violence begets violence, so the hatred against mutants ultimately caused immense harm to humanity. During the Operation Zero Tolerance storyline, a very strange techno-organic figure appeared named Bastion, whose history we'll discuss shortly, but first, let's talk about how Bastion's anti-mutant propaganda became so fatal for humans. Bastion took advantage of vulnerable humans, turning them into Sentinels. He targeted people seeking medical help or undergoing prosthetic surgeries, tricking them into believing they were receiving a life-saving operation. In reality, it was a procedure to inject nano-sentinel technology that turned them into sleeper agents. These sleeper agents were humans turned into Sentinels without even realizing it. Their skin would split open, and their bones and blood vessels would fuse with Sentinel alloy to transform them into weapons. One of the most cruel incidents happened to an Indian police officer named Karima Shapander, who was infected with nano-sentinel technology and became the Omega Sentinel. She started as a heroic police officer, but the infection turned her into an antagonist. Her living body became a weapon to hunt mutants, and, slowly but steadily, her humanity was erased. The widespread deployment of Prime Sentinels was brilliantly adapted in X-Men 97, where humanity was targeted and turned into Bastion's puppets to wipe out mutant kind. The powers built directly into the body. At the very core of their system, Sentinels have a biogenetic detecting array that scans for X genes. It's the primary function of these giant robots built directly into their chassis. Unless a mutant possesses an extremely powerful cloaking ability or telepathic shielding, the Sentinels will inevitably gain the upper hand. Over time, these functions were upgraded, allowing a Sentinel to measure the energy output of a mutant and calculate an attack accordingly. Advanced technology even enables them to adapt to mutant powers and counterattack with precision. For instance, if Sunspot attacks these robots with a thermal plasma blast, they can deploy nitrogen blasts to freeze him. Days of Future Past showed us the alternate future's Mark X Sentinels, whose hands morph into blades or claws mid-fight. These futuristic Sentinels were actually constructed using Mystique's shapeshifting DNA, granting them adaptive powers on a molecular level. They absorb incoming energy and reflect it back, such as countering Sunspot's solar fire with ice generated organically from their bodies. However, the internal programming contains a bizarre paradox, as popularized in fan lore and comic tropes. If a Sentinel's artificial intelligence evolves beyond its core directive and develops self-awareness, it may classify its own unnatural existence as a threat to humanity, or it may detect mutant origins within human genetics, resulting in a self-destructive logic loop. Why does that purple and magenta look actually matter? In the classic era of comics, when X-Men was first created, the writers and illustrators chose their color schemes very intentionally. For heroic figures like Wolverine and Cyclops, they used primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. But for the villains, they needed something distinct, deep, and menacing. That's where the iconic purple and magenta palette came from. In comic book art, a giant robot with purple and magenta colors instantly stood out against the X-Men. Beyond color, their face and eyes were sculpted to emphasize cold villainy. The single-lens optical visors are completely devoid of emotion, and so is their blank metallic mouthplate. That expressionless face represents their unyielding and ruthless nature. You simply cannot negotiate with them. However, in the Days of Future Past film, the 1973 Sentinels were styled in brown, silver, and gray, while the future Mark X Sentinels were pitch black. The absence of vibrant colors in those future Sentinels made them look even more terrifying and lethal. The link between Master Mold and Bastion. Bastion is a crucial figure in Sentinel evolution because he's a literal fusion of two of the most powerful Sentinel programs, Master Mold and Nimrod. His origin story was explored in Uncanny X-Men. After Master Mold was destroyed, fragments of its core survived and absorbed the brain patterns of Stephen Lang. Meanwhile, Nimrod arrived from a futuristic timeline with far superior tech. The two entities eventually merged into a single unit to battle the X-Men. During that conflict, Rogue and Dazzler forced the hybrid through the Siege Perilous, a multi-dimensional gateway that judges individuals and grants them a fresh start with wiped memories. The Siege Perilous reformatted the merged machine, combining Master Mold and Nimrod into a techno-organic humanoid named Bastion. Emerging on Earth with no memory of the past, he was taken in by a kind woman named Rose Gilberti, who named him Sebastian Gilberti. However, as mentioned earlier, this man would eventually grow up to build an army of Prime Sentinels dedicated to extinguishing mutant kind. How different is the movie Sentinel from the comic one? By now, you've likely noticed several key differences between comic Sentinels and their cinematic counterparts. Let's break down the major distinctions. In comic canon, Master Mold serves as the primary manufacturing computer for the Sentinel line. However, 20th Century Fox's X-Men movies omitted Master Mold entirely, placing production under Trask Industries instead. We also see major structural and functional changes. Comic Sentinels are built out of titanium, steel, and heavy metallic alloys. In contrast, the 1973 movie Sentinels were constructed from space-age polymers to bypass Magneto's control, while the future Mark X Sentinels featured biomechanical, interlocking scale plating. Functionally, classic comic Sentinels rely on boot-mounted jet thrusters, whereas the movie Sentinels feature chest-mounted propulsion vents. The Mark X Sentinels can adjust their flight mechanics organically. Additionally, comic Sentinels primarily use energy repulsors, capture coils, and plasma beams, while movie Sentinels carry arm-mounted Gatling guns firing kinetic rounds. And the Mark X units shapeshift their limbs into blades and energy weapons mid-battle. Movie adaptations took the core concept from the comics and modernized it to feel grounded and menacing on screen. And honestly, considering those big goofy magenta and purple robots, they did a pretty good job. What's still genuinely ambiguous or disputed? While the core history of Sentinels is well documented, certain lore debates and continuity discrepancies persist among readers. First is their total kill count. In classic canon, Bolivar Trask's initial invention was responsible for numerous deaths, but during the Janosha massacre alone, wild Sentinels slaughtered 16 million mutants in a matter of moments. Because different Sentinel variants operate across different eras and alternate timelines, calculating an exact overall casualty figure is virtually impossible. While it seems to suggest clean generational progression, Sentinel production was never managed by a single corporate entity. Over the decades, various government organizations, independent scientists, and criminal syndicates created and designated their own Sentinel models, creating overlapping timelines. Furthermore, comic writers have frequently adjusted the exact origins and relationship between Master Mold and Nimrod. Lastly, their core motivation occasionally shifts depending on the storyline. In the Age of Apocalypse, Sentinels were actually deployed to protect human survivors from Apocalypse rather than hunting mutants, showing how writers adapt these iconic machines to fit different narrative contexts. What's the single most devastating thing a Sentinel has ever done? Let's conclude with the most catastrophic tragedy in Sentinel history, an event adapted by X-Men 97, though its comic origins are even more brutal. The moment represents Marvel's most devastating mutant genocide, an act so horrific that even a Sentinel later questioned its own existence. In New X-Men issues 114 to 116, written by Grant Morrison, we meet Cassandra Nova, the telepathic twin sister of Charles Xavier. Driven by pure hatred for her brother and mutant kind, she reactivated a long-abandoned self-replicating Master Mold in Ecuador. She dispatched giant mutated wild Sentinels to the island nation of Janosha, resulting in the slaughter of over 16 million mutants, including women and children. Years later, a lingering three-headed wild Sentinel achieved self-awareness through the entity Danger. Realizing the horror of the mass extinction it had carried out, the remorseful machine chose to leave Earth to prevent further harm. While X-Men 97 altered the mastermind behind the attack to Bastion and Mr. Sinister, the core message remains unchanged. The Sentinels stand as an enduring symbol of systemic destruction and tragic loss. And that's all we got for you guys today. The Sentinels started their journey as fierce mutant hunters and eventually evolved into instruments of catastrophic genocide. So, don't underestimate the power of a Sentinel. It can be a terrifying match for even the most powerful mutants. If you enjoyed this breakdown, let us know in the comments down below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel because that's the best way to get more videos like this one. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time.